The news hit the world like a thunderbolt. Nnamdi Kanu, the man who had already been discharged and acquitted by a Nigerian court in 2022, was suddenly sentenced to life imprisonment. No warning. No smooth build-up. No long legal explanation. Just a shocking judgment that changed everything in one moment. People across Africa felt the impact instantly. It was not just another courtroom headline. It was a major event that shook politics, public opinion, and international conversation. This was a man whose case had already been decided in court. A legal victory had been recorded. Nigerians remembered the 2022 ruling clearly. Many believed that the matter was settled forever. But now, a new conviction had appeared out of nowhere, raising many questions and forcing people to think deeply about what justice really means. Politicians reacted. Analysts reacted. Citizens reacted. Some were confused. Some were angry. Some were worried. Others were simply stunned, asking themselves one serious question: how can a man who was already cleared by a high court suddenly face life in prison? That question did not stay in Nigeria alone. It traveled across borders. It reached Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Tanzania, and beyond. It spread through television, radio, internet discussions, community gatherings, and dinner table conversations. This was not small news. This was a moment that looked like a turning point in African political justice. And in the middle of all this shock, one voice rose quickly and sharply: William Ruto, the President of Kenya. There was no long delay before he reacted. There was no waiting for diplomatic protocols. There was no silence while advisors prepared official statements. Ruto stepped forward with a firm tone and a clear position. He spoke publicly and loudly, and his words showed that he was not trying to play political games. He was responding from a place of deep conviction. William Ruto said he was confused by the entire situation. For him, the heart of the matter was simple: a court is a court. A legal judgment is a legal judgment. When a court discharges and acquits a person, that ruling is not supposed to be temporary. It is not supposed to be an opinion. It is supposed to be final unless overturned through a recognized legal appeal process. But in this case, something different had happened. The process looked strange and unexpected. Ruto said the sudden life sentence made it look like 2022 never happened. It made it seem as though the discharge and acquittal had been erased from history. That, he explained, is not normal legal behavior. That is something that raises big questions about fairness, political interference, and the power of the judiciary. He said it with the seriousness of a leader who understands the weight of justice in a developing continent. His message was not casual. It was not soft. It was not diplomatic. It carried the tone of someone who felt that something fundamental was being threatened. Ruto framed the situation not only as a Nigerian issue but as an African issue. He believed that justice in Africa must be reliable, stable, and respected by governments. Otherwise, democracy itself becomes weak. He said that if a court ruling can be reversed quietly in such a powerful case, then what protects ordinary citizens? What protects activists? What protects journalists? What protects anyone who stands up to government policies? These were serious questions, and they were not questions to be ignored. In his view, the sudden sentencing raised fears that political pressure might be shaping legal outcomes. And once that begins, the justice system can lose credibility very quickly. Ruto warned that Africa cannot claim to stand for democratic values if its leaders remain silent when legal order is being undermined. These were strong words, and they traveled fast. They reached major newspapers. They appeared in television discussions. They circulated on social media platforms. People quoted them, shared them, debated them, and used them to build bigger conversations about the role of government in legal proceedings. Ruto's statement also reminded many Africans of a simple truth: justice must look like justice. If a legal result surprises the world in such a dramatic way, then the process must be examined. That is how trust is maintained. That is how democracy stays alive. He spoke with the calm confidence of a leader who knows that silence in such moments can be taken as approval. He was not willing to be seen as someone who watched and said nothing. He chose to speak not only for political leaders but for ordinary people who believe in fairness. His reaction carried a sense of urgency. It said loudly that something here was not normal and required deeper examination. This was one of the reasons his voice became such a central part of the global reaction. By speaking early, he helped define how the issue was discussed. He did not wait for other presidents to break the silence. He did not hide behind diplomatic caution. He put his position on the table clearly and directly. In the middle of the shock and confusion, Ruto's words created a direction. They allowed others to speak. They encouraged public focus. They turned the situation from a sudden legal surprise into a larger conversation about justice, the rule of law, and the future of political freedom in Africa. And this was only the beginning of what followed. Within hours of the sentence being announced, reporters moved quickly toward William Ruto in Nairobi. They expected him to step out with the usual polished diplomatic language that leaders use when commenting on sensitive foreign matters. They expected a gentle tone, a balanced statement, or maybe even silence while he waited for more information. But that is not what happened. Ruto spoke with directness, clarity, and a firmness that made everyone stop and listen. He began by saying that the situation surrounding Nnamdi Kanu was not only troubling but deeply confusing. He reminded the world that in 2022, a Nigerian court had discharged and acquitted Kanu. It was a major legal victory, and the judgment was seen as final. Ruto questioned how a man who had already been legally cleared could now face a life sentence. He said something was wrong, and it needed to be examined openly. For Ruto, the issue was not about taking sides politically. It was not about supporting or opposing a particular movement. It was about respecting the justice system of an African country, respecting the finality of court rulings, and respecting the rights of individuals who have already gone through due legal process. When courts give a judgment, he said, governments must respect it. They cannot change it without a clear and lawful process. Otherwise, the system loses meaning. Ruto pointed out that the 2022 ruling was not vague. It was not uncertain. The court had discharged and acquitted Kanu. That means the charges were dismissed. That means he was free under the law. Now, seeing him sentenced to life imprisonment without a transparent legal reversal raised worries about consistency and fairness. He said justice cannot be rewritten suddenly. It cannot appear and disappear like a shadow. Justice must be predictable, stable, and open. He warned that what happened to Kanu could become a dangerous pattern if left unchallenged. Today it could be Kanu, tomorrow it could be any activist. Next week it could be a journalist, a lawyer, or even a regular citizen. When legal judgments are unclear or easily reversed, no one is protected. The law becomes weak, and fear becomes stronger. Ruto emphasized that Africa is trying to build strong democratic systems. For those systems to work, courts must stand above politics. Legal decisions must be respected even when they are uncomfortable. He said democracy becomes empty when governments only follow the laws they like and ignore the ones they do not. He called this new sentence a blow to the idea of a fair and independent judiciary. As Ruto continued to speak, his tone sharpened. He said the life sentence looked like a heavy political move rather than a natural legal process. He said the world must question not only the outcome but the path that produced it. A judgment that comes suddenly, after a man has already been cleared, does not inspire trust. It creates suspicion, fear, and instability. Reporters asked him whether he thought the Nigerian government acted out of political pressure. Ruto refused to accuse anyone directly, but he said the signs pointed to a serious problem. When legal processes begin to look unpredictable, it is usually because something beneath the surface is influencing them. He said every African country must resist the temptation to use courts as weapons. When courts become tools of political control, democracy weakens, and citizens lose faith in the entire system. His words were not just criticisms. They were warnings. Ruto said Africa is entering a new era where people are more informed, more empowered, and more willing to challenge injustice. Leaders must understand that decisions like this one do not just disappear. They travel across borders. They shape conversations. They affect how Africa is seen both by its own people and by the international community. He said if Africa wants respect from the world, It must show that it respects its own legal systems. It must show that justice cannot be twisted for political gain. He insisted that the Nnamdi Kanu case had now become more than a national issue. It had become a symbol of the fight for fairness in Africa. He said it clearly: justice must not be selective. Ruto ended his speech by saying that the truth will always challenge bad decisions. If the courts truly acquitted Kanu in 2022, then someone must explain how he now sits under a life sentence. Someone must answer why the legal process shifted so dramatically. And someone must take responsibility for ensuring the rule of law is not destroyed. His message spread quickly through Africa and the diaspora. Some leaders agreed with him. Some remained silent. Some citizens felt encouraged that at least one African president had spoken openly. Others felt fear that the judiciary was becoming too fragile. But one thing was clear: Ruto's condemnation was not just a comment. It was a spark. A spark that forced everyone to ask harder questions. A spark that pushed the conversation from quiet confusion to loud demand for answers. And that spark was about to push Africa into the next chapter of this unfolding story. Then came the pressure. It began quietly, like a slow wave moving across the continent, and then it grew louder. The sentencing of Nnamdi Kanu was no longer just a court decision. It had become a continental conversation. People wanted answers, and they wanted them urgently. Governments reacted. Journalists dug deeper. Lawyers examined old documents. Commentators analyzed every detail. And in the middle of all this, William Ruto stood firm and refused to soften his position. Diplomatic phone calls began almost immediately. Some African governments urged caution. Some asked Ruto to lower his tone. Others stayed silent, waiting to see where the situation would go. Silence, in political terms, can be a powerful choice, and many leaders were trying not to be pulled into a controversy that was growing larger by the hour. But Ruto did not change his message. He said again that justice must remain stable. Courts must be reliable. Legal judgments must mean something. Meanwhile, legal experts from across Africa and beyond began sharing their opinions. Many of them argued that if a court in 2022 discharged and acquitted Kanu, then any attempt to sentence him again needed to follow a transparent legal path. If that path did not exist, then the sentence could be seen as illegitimate. These opinions spread quickly on radio, television, social platforms, academic papers, and political talk shows. Activists also stepped forward. Some of them had never spoken publicly about Kanu before, but they now felt that something deeper was at stake, a principle that, if ignored, could affect many future cases. They warned that when the justice system becomes unpredictable, society starts to lose faith. When faith is lost, stability goes with it. People become anxious, and political trust breaks down. In several regions, discussions took place in markets, offices, schools, and public gatherings. People debated what this judgment meant. Some believed it was a political attempt to silence a powerful voice. Others believed there must be hidden legal reasons the public was not yet aware of. Others simply wanted clarity. No matter the perspective, one thing was clear: the judgment had shaken the system and demanded explanation. Ruto continued pushing the same message: Africa stands at a crossroads. One direction leads to strong democracy, where courts remain independent and political power respects legal boundaries. The other direction leads to a darker place, where laws lose meaning, and government decisions replace judicial rulings. He said Africa had fought too hard for freedom to allow its legal systems to crumble under political weight. He knew these words would not sit well with everyone, but he also knew silence would be worse. A leader who sees injustice and says nothing becomes part of the problem. So he continued speaking, calm but firm. Human rights groups joined the conversation. They said the case now represented a larger issue: whether individuals in Africa could depend on courts for protection, or whether courts were becoming extensions of political interests. They pointed out that once citizens begin to believe that legal outcomes can change at any moment, the trust that holds society together begins to loosen. Pressure also came from citizens outside Africa. Nigerian communities abroad demanded explanations from their governments. Many wrote public letters, raised petitions, and called for reviews of the legal process. For them, The sentencing was not just an African story, it had become a global debate about justice and human rights. Ruto watched these reactions and stayed consistent. He repeated that he was not defending Kanu based on politics or ethnicity. He was defending a principle: when legal systems collapse, entire nations collapse with them. He said if courts are not respected, then democracy becomes an empty slogan used only to control elections, not to uphold fairness. There were also quiet political consequences. Some African governments began looking closely at their own legal systems, asking themselves whether their courts were strong enough to resist political influence. Others began bracing for public pressure as citizens demanded greater transparency. In this way, the case created waves far beyond Nigeria. Political analysts warned that the sentence could redefine West African politics. If upheld, it might strengthen governments that wanted more control. If reversed, it might prove that public pressure could still influence the future of justice in Africa. Either way, the continent was watching every move. Ruto's speeches continued circulating widely. People quoted him in news articles, comment sections, podcasts, and academic reports. Some praised him for speaking boldly. Others criticized him for stepping into Nigeria's internal affairs. But even critics admitted one thing: he had forced the world to pay attention. And that was the moment when the case stopped being about one man alone. It stopped being only about Nnamdi Kanu. It became a symbol. It became a warning. It became a test of what African democracy truly means. Ruto ended one of his statements with a message that echoed across the continent: if the justice system fails in one place, it weakens everywhere. He said Africa cannot build a strong future unless it protects the principles that hold society together. With that, the world continued watching. Citizens waited for the next move. Governments remained under pressure. Legal experts looked for answers. And history prepared to record what would happen next. Because this story had become far greater than a courtroom decision. It had become a battle for the soul of African justice.